Released Israeli captives and Palestinian detainees. Why have their conditions drawn so much attention during the ceasefire and exchange deal? Israelis and Western media have accused Hamas of abuse and rape of the captives, but have remained silent on well-documented conditions, including rape and torture, of Palestinians detained by Israel. So let's take a look at some of the circumstances and conditions of the 30 Israeli captives who were released and the more than 2,000 Palestinian detainees freed, some of whom have been held for over 40 years in Israeli jails. The first group of Israeli captives released included 3 women freed by Hamas. They were quickly rushed into Red Cross vehicles and returned to Israel. They appeared only momentarily, looking exhausted with dark circles under their eyes, deprived of sunlight and significantly underweight after more than a year in Hamas's tunnels. Overwhelmed by the chaos and commotion surrounding their first public appearances, they were handed certificates of release and gift bags by Hamas, before being transferred with minimal publicity. Medical examinations in Israel confirmed they were in good health. In exchange, the release of the first group of 90 Palestinian detainees from Israeli prisons was delayed until late into the night by Israel. Celebrations were banned by both Israeli forces and the Palestinian Authority. The detainees consisted of 61 women, 20 men and 9 children, appearing exhausted, disheveled, aged, unwell and visibly mistreated as they stepped off the buses. Several Palestinian detainees explicitly reported being tortured, humiliated and starved in Israeli prisons, with visible evidence of the abuse. From the young to the old, many emerged in pain, limping and suffering from injuries including broken limbs.
طلعنا من الجحيم، ضرب، قمعات، غاز، تربيط في الشتوية على المي، بهدلة رسمي، السجن جحيم 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 جحيم.
وضع صعب يعني من بداية الحرب والوضع من أسوأ لأسوأ.
Each subsequent exchange followed a similar pattern. A few Israeli captives were released from Gaza in exchange for a large wave of Palestinian prisoners freed from Israeli jails. The Israeli captives varied in their physical and emotional states, but most appeared pale, very thin and blunt in their expressions. After the first release, Hamas and other Palestinian groups began staging high-profile handovers of Israeli captives, while non-Israeli captives such as the Thai nationals were transferred to the Red Cross without any public spectacle. Hamas's publicized handovers were polarizing and likely served multiple purposes, demonstrating that Hamas remains in power in Gaza with intact military capabilities and manpower, and reaffirming the strong support Hamas has among Palestinians in Gaza who gathered in large crowds wanting to see the ceasefire and exchange agreements go through. Also serving to humiliate the Israeli government by showcasing its failure to achieve its stated objective of defeating Hamas and returning the captives through military force. The banners displayed on stage were written in Arabic, Hebrew and sometimes English, as Hamas knew a global audience would be watching the release of the captives. The spectacles peaked during one of the exchanges when an Israeli captive kissed the heads of 2 Hamas fighters, a moment that sparked outrage among Israeli viewers and politicians, leading to debates over whether the scene was genuine or staged, particularly infuriating members of Israel's far-right government who said Israel should open the gates of hell on Hamas and take revenge. These scenes also enraged the US, who have supplied Israel with the missiles and diplomatic cover to conduct its war.
The president meets with these people, he hears their stories, he's outraged and rightfully so. He's tired of watching these videos every weekend where hostages that are emaciated are released and bodies are turned over, and sometimes it's the wrong bodies, and this 5 here and 3 there, and these games that are being played, and he's lost his patience with it. He's been very clear about this from the beginning. He's created space and time for this to be solved, and now it's time for seeing it come to an end.
Over on the other side, each wave of released Palestinian detainees further exposed the brutal conditions in Israeli prisons. Some required immediate hospitalization, whilst others cried in distress, warning of the dire conditions Palestinian detainees faced. Reports have documented Israeli soldiers sodomizing, beating and tasing Palestinian detainees at Sde Timan prison, one of Israel's most notorious detention facilities. Numerous former detainees have reported cases of sexual abuse as part of Israel's imprisonment. Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, a prominent doctor from Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, is believed to have been tortured to death by Israeli forces, with sexual abuse playing a significant role in the torture used against him in Israeli prisons. Throughout the war and prison exchanges, families of Israeli captives protested, urging the government to continue the deal, fearing delays would worsen the conditions of the Israeli captives. Whilst Israeli officials claimed Hamas was abusing the hostages, some of the captives who were released spoke to select Israeli media outlets describing isolation, weight loss, and constant fear of Israeli strikes, which killed several Israeli captives. UN experts, the New York Times, and The Guardian have reported on cases of sexual violence during the October 7th attacks, with The Guardian citing multiple corroborating pieces of evidence of sexual assault. The New York Times reported that an Israeli hostage said she was sexually assaulted and tortured in Gaza. Amit Susanna became the first former captive to publicly allege sexual abuse in captivity. A UN report found clear and convincing information that some former captives suffered conflict-related sexual violence. Hamas has repeatedly denied allegations of sexual violence committed by its fighters on October 7th and after. The group's public staging of captives' releases may have been an attempt to counter these accusations and show the conditions of the captives publicly. Israeli soldiers have repeatedly filmed themselves abusing Palestinians and boasting about Gaza's destruction over the past 15 months. Systematic abuse in Israeli prisons has been widely documented, with human rights organizations and former detainees reporting extensive torture in facilities where every inmate is deliberately subjected to harsh, relentless pain and suffering. Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem has called Israel's prison system a network of torture camps in a report titled Welcome to Hell. Many Palestinian inmates who have testified about prison conditions have never officially been charged with a crime. The treatment of the deceased has also varied significantly. In December 2023, Israel returned a truckload of dead Palestinians in unmarked body bags, believed to be individuals who were abducted and killed or died in Israeli custody. This incident was widely seen as indicative of Israel's dehumanization of Palestinians. Hamas returned the bodies of the Israeli captives, the Bibas family, who it says were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza in November 2023. They were returned in black coffins marked with their names and photos, handing them over to the Red Cross. Initially, Israel released Palestinian detainees in plain grey prison attire. However, in response to Hamas's use of symbolism during the captive releases, Israeli authorities later began adding written messages on the detainees' clothing, putting the Star of David and We Never Forget Nor Forgive written in Arabic. As the first phase of the deal concluded, more captives were returned to Israel in the 42-day ceasefire deal than in 15 months of full-scale war, and the exchange became one of the largest mass releases of Palestinians from Israeli prisons in history, many of whom were women and children.